All right, so if you've got your eye on a university professor job in Maharashtra, you need to listen up. The entire hiring game has just changed. There's a new rule book, a new government resolution, and it's all about a data-driven, formula-based approach. So today, we're going to decode exactly what this means for you.
Okay, so what's the core of this whole thing? It all boils down to this super simple but really powerful formula, 60-20-20. Get this, a massive 60% of your total score is decided by your credentials. You know, your resume, your papers, all that stuff before you even show up for an interview. The other 40%, that's when you're in the hot seat. It's split right down the middle between a teaching demo and the actual interview. The whole point is to make things way more objective and balanced.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle a huge change in the hiring blueprint. Then we'll dive deep into the scorecards, first for assistant professors and then for the more senior roles. After that, we'll look at that final 40%, the in-person tests. And to wrap it all up, we'll see how everything gets added together to make that final merit list. Ready? Let's go.
Okay, first up, let's talk about what's probably the most controversial piece of this new puzzle. It's something called the University Ranking Multiplier. And believe me, this one little thing is a total game changer.
So you might be asking, what are these rankings anyway? Well, you've almost definitely heard of them. Here in India, the main one is NIRF. That's the National Institutional Ranking Framework. And then you've got the big global ones like QS, THE, and so on. Basically, they're report cards for universities. But here's the kicker. For the very first time, your university's grade is directly going to affect your personal score when you apply for a job.
So how does this multiplier actually work? It's pretty simple, really. If you're coming from a top-tier university, we're talking top 100 in India or top 500 globally, your score stays as is. No changes. You get a full 1.0 multiplier. But if your university is in that next tier down, your hard-earned points get multiplied by 0.9, so you lose 10%. And for everyone else coming from other UGC-approved universities, your score gets multiplied by 0.8, which is a 20% reduction right off the bat.
All right, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Say you're gunning for an assistant professor job. How in the world do they calculate that huge 60% chunk of your score? Let's pull it apart and look at it piece by piece. So, the very foundation of your score, it all starts with your grades from your bachelor's and master's degrees. And you can see, the system is designed to heavily reward the top scorers. I mean, look at this. If you got over 80% in your postgrad, you get the full 14 points. But if you were under 60%, that drops to 10. Together, these degrees can net you up to 24 points. And here's the key thing to remember. This is your raw score, before that university multiplier we just talked about gets slapped on.
Next up, advanced qualifications. And wow, they put a huge emphasis here. A PhD on its own is worth a whopping 17 points. But, and this is an important but, you can't double dip. You can't add your MPhil points on top of your PhD points. The max for that whole category is 17. Same story with the qualifying tests. Clearing the net with a JRF is great, it gets you 5 points, but that's the ceiling. You can't stack points from net and SET, for example.
And finally, to round out that 60-point credential score, we have your real-world experience. For teaching, you get 1 point per year, which sounds good, but it maxes out at 6 points. Then there's your research output. You know, your publications, any books or patents, awards you've won. All that stuff is obviously super important, but the entire category is capped at a maximum of just 8 marks.
Okay, so that covers the entry-level roles. But what happens when you're applying for a more senior position, like an associate professor or a full professor? Well, this is where the rules of the game shift, and they shift dramatically.
Yeah, the whole balance of what they're looking for just flips on its head. For these senior roles, nobody really cares about your grades from back in the day. Instead, the scale tips, and it tips heavily toward your proven track record. We're talking about high-impact publications in top journals, how many PhD students you've successfully guided, and this is a big one, your ability to bring in the cash through funded research projects. And this table really drives that point home. See those categories, PhD guidance and R&D funding? They literally don't even exist on the scorecard for an assistant professor. But for senior applicants, they suddenly appear. And they aren't just small add-ons. No, they become absolutely critical high-point value items. It's a completely different evaluation. Okay, deep breath. We've made it through the 60% that's all about what's on paper. Now it's time to talk about that final, crucial 40%. This is the part where you have to perform live and in person.
So that 40% is sliced right down the middle, perfectly even. You've got your teaching skills assessment worth 20% and your interview performance worth the other 20%. It's a clear signal that they value your ability to teach just as much as they value your ability to talk about your subject and your future plans.
Now, when you do that teaching demo, don't think for a second they're just checking if you know your stuff. Oh no, they're watching everything. Are you using modern teaching tools? How clear and effective is your delivery? How are your communication skills? And what's your overall vibe in the classroom, your presence, your ethics, the whole package?
Then you move on to the interview, and this is where they really dig deep. Of course, they're going to grill you on your subject knowledge, but they're also testing your critical thinking, your problem-solving skills, and what your vision is for the future. What are your plans for teaching and research? And here's a pro tip. You absolutely need to know your stuff when it comes to the new National Education Policy, or NEP.
Okay, so you've done it all. Your resume has been scored, you've aced your teaching demo, you nailed the interview. Now what? How does this all get mashed together to decide whether or not you get that offer letter?
Well, the math at the end is actually surprisingly simple. They just take your score from that first 60-point bucket, add your score from the 20-point teaching demo, and then add your score from the 20-point interview. Boom! A plus B plus C gives you your final score out of 100. That's it.
But, and this is a really big but, there's a catch. There's a minimum qualifying score. You have to get at least 50 out of 100, 50%. If you get a 49, you're out. Doesn't matter if you're the only person who applied. It's a hard cutoff to even be considered for the job.
And really, this quote from the actual government resolution says it all. The whole point, their stated goal, is to make the hiring process highly objective and to minimize subjective discretion. Right? Every single point, every multiplier, every cap we've talked about, it's all in service of that one single idea, taking personal bias out of the equation as much as possible.
So there it is, a very clear, very transparent, and very, very numbers-driven way to hire university professors. It's a system built on data. But it does leave you with a big final question, doesn't it? In our push to create this perfectly objective, quantitative scorecard, are we forgetting about all those things that you just can't measure? The passion, the spark, the things that make a teacher not just good, but truly inspiring. Something to think about.